In the scorching summer heat of 1847, Jack Williams, a 42-year-old farmer from the small town of Longview, Texas, felt his life crumble into pieces. The love of his life, Emma, had just succumbed to a relentless fever. The disease, which had swept through the region like a merciless storm, left Jack with nothing but memories of the woman he had spent nearly 2 decades with. Emma was his world, the person who had shared his dreams, his burdens, and his hopes for the future. Now, all of that was gone, leaving him in a desolate void of grief. Jack's mourning was overwhelming. He couldn't bear to stay in the home they had built together, where every corner echoed with her presence. The farmhouse, which once hummed with the warmth of family, now felt like a cold, lifeless shell. He had watched Emma wither away in the span of just 10 days. Her bright smile fading as the fever took hold of her, delirium clouding her once vibrant eyes. The funeral was simple, as she would have wanted, and the mourners offered their condolences. But Jack could barely hear their words. His heart had been shattered. No words of comfort could heal the wound left by her death. In the months that followed, Jack tried to continue with his life. He worked the land, tending to the animals, but everything felt empty. The farm was no longer a place of life, laughter, and love. It was a place of unbearable silence. Jack spent more and more time in the fields, avoiding the house where he had shared so much with Emma. He even slept in the barn some nights, finding solace only in the solitude of the land. But even solitude couldn't numb the pain. Jack knew that he had to leave the farm if he was to survive the crushing sorrow that weighed him down. So, in March of 1847, 6 months after Emma's death, Jack made an unexpected decision. He sold half of his land to a neighboring farmer and used the proceeds to buy an abandoned shack on the outskirts of town, a dilapidated structure hidden away in the wilderness. The shack, once a home for a traveling cowboy, had long since been abandoned, its walls rotting and its roof caving in. It was exactly what Jack wanted. A place to escape the memories of Emma and the expectations of the people in town. He told his farmhands to continue managing the remaining land, promising to pay them on time, and left with nothing but a few tools, some clothes, and provisions in an old cart. The journey to the shack took the better part of a day. The road bumpy and uneven, but Jack was determined. He didn't care about the condition of the place, he just needed to be alone. When he finally arrived, Jack was taken aback. The shack was even worse than he remembered. It was surrounded by overgrown weeds and trees, and the air felt thick with the remnants of years of neglect. But it was perfect for what he needed. A place where he could hide away from the world and wallow in his grief without anyone to judge him. Little did Jack know, this seemingly desolate shack was about to become the setting for a life-altering encounter, one that would forever change the course of his journey and lead him to discover something he never expected. A new hope. When Jack Williams reached the abandoned shack he had bought, the coldness of the place matched the numbness he felt in his heart. He had come to the isolated spot in the wilderness, far from Longview, Texas, to escape the suffocating grief that had consumed his life since Emma's death. The land, which had once been filled with the sound of their laughter and love, was now eerily quiet, with only the rustling of the wind through the tall trees breaking. The shack was everything he had hoped for. Desolate, run-down, and forgotten by time. It was exactly what Jack needed. A place where he could bury himself in his sorrow and finally stop pretending that everything was okay. He had no intention of returning to society. Jack's life had been irrevocably altered by Emma's death, and nothing in this world could bring her back. The house they had shared, the farm that had once been full of potential, now felt like a monument to the love he had lost. This shack, with its cracked walls and dilapidated roof, seemed like the perfect place to withdraw and disappear from the memories and the people who had once known him. But as Jack settled in that first night, the weight of his decision began to sink in. Despite the loneliness and emptiness that filled the space, there was still something oddly comforting about the stillness. He didn't need to talk to anyone, didn't need to pretend to be happy for anyone's sake. He simply existed in a world that had lost its meaning. However, As the days went by, Jack found himself wandering the grounds more frequently, trying to keep his mind occupied with the task of fixing up the shack. It wasn't much, but the manual labor kept him distracted from the constant ache in his chest. On the evening of the fourth day, as Jack was gathering firewood, he heard something strange, a faint sound carried on the wind, like the soft cry of a baby. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. Was his mind playing tricks on him? He had come here to escape, to be alone. The last thing he needed was another complication in his already complicated life. Curiosity got the better of him, and Jack followed the sound through the dense brush and trees, his footsteps crunching on the dry earth. As he approached the shack, he noticed a faint glow coming from the broken windows. He cautiously walked toward the door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. The scene before him took him completely by surprise. Inside, amidst the ruin and decay of the shack, was a young woman, no older than 20, kneeling on the dirt floor. She was holding 2 crying infants in her arms, desperately trying to calm them. Her clothes were ragged, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. She looked worn, desperate, and terrified. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, the sight of the young woman and her babies momentarily driving the grief from his mind. The world outside had fallen away, leaving only the sound of the crying children. The woman's eyes met his, wide with fear, and she immediately recoiled, pressing the babies to her chest as if to shield them from his gaze. Jack's voice broke the silence, his words coming out in a hoarse whisper. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The young woman, still trembling, answered with a voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't kick us out. We have nowhere else to go." Jack, taken aback by the desperation in her voice, lowered his hand and spoke gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand what's happening." The woman's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she spoke. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've been living here for 3 weeks. My father, he threw me out when he found out I was pregnant. He said I dishonored the family. He threw me out with nothing." Jack's heart clenched at her words. He had never imagined that someone, let alone a young woman with 2 babies, could end up in such a dire situation. Clara continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "The father of the babies. He disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. I don't know if he's alive or if he ran away, but he left me all alone." Clara's story hit Jack hard. He couldn't help but empathize with her. He had once been in a similar position, though not with the same circumstances. The pain of losing Emma was still raw, but now, seeing Clara's plight, he felt something stir within him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of compassion and empathy. Jack had come to this place to escape the pain of his past, but now he was faced with a decision that would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. He could turn Clara and her babies away, send them back into the cold, but something inside him told him that wasn't the right choice. He couldn't abandon her, not after hearing her story, not after seeing the desperation in her eyes. The young woman, still trembling, answered with a voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't kick us out. We have nowhere else to go." Jack, taken aback by the desperation in her voice, lowered his hand and spoke gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand what's happening." The woman's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she spoke. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've been living here for 3 weeks. My father, he threw me out when he found out I was pregnant. He said I dishonored the family. He threw me out with nothing." Jack's heart clenched at her words. He had never imagined that someone, let alone a young woman with 2 babies, could end up in such a dire situation. Clara continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "The father of the babies. He disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. I don't know if he's alive or if he ran away, but he left me all alone." Clara's story hit Jack hard. He couldn't help but empathize with her. He had once been in a similar position, though not with the same circumstances. The pain of losing Emma was still raw, but now, seeing Clara's plight, he felt something stir within him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months. A sense of compassion and empathy. Jack had come to this place to escape the pain of his past. But now he was faced with a decision that would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. He could turn Clara and her babies away, send them back into the cold. But something inside him told him that wasn't the right choice. He couldn't abandon her. Not after hearing her story, not after seeing the desperation in her eyes. "What do you need?" Jack asked softly, the question hanging in the air between them. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I don't know. I don't have anything. I have no money, no family, just my babies and me." Jack looked down at the crying infants, their faces red and puffy from hunger. He knew that he couldn't leave them out here in the wilderness, struggling to survive on their own. The decision was clear. Jack stepped forward, his heart heavy with the weight of his choice. "Wait here," Jack said, his voice resolute. "I'll get you something to eat." As he left the shack to fetch food and supplies from his cart, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected encounter had just opened a new chapter in his life. He had come here to escape from the world. But perhaps, just perhaps, the world had found him when he least expected it. When Jack returned with food, Clara's tear-streaked face transformed into a look of relief and gratitude. And in that moment, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. The story of healing, redemption, and perhaps a second chance at life. As Jack returned to the shack with food and supplies, he felt the weight of the decision he had just made. He had come to this isolated place to escape from the pain of losing Emma, to bury himself in solitude, hoping that the quiet of the wilderness would help him heal. But now, standing in front of Clara and her two hungry babies, he realized that his journey had taken an unexpected turn. What had begun as an escape from grief was quickly becoming a new chapter in his life. One that was filled with uncertainty, but also a strange sense of responsibility. Clara's tear-filled eyes watched him as he approached the shack with a sack of bread, dried meat, and a bottle of goat's milk. Jack placed the items on the ground, and Clara hurriedly took them, her hands trembling with gratitude. Her babies, Miguel and Maria, were quiet now, their cries subsiding as they were fed. Jack watched in silence as Clara gently cradled the babies, her exhaustion apparent, but her love for them undeniable. "You don't need to thank me," Jack said softly, feeling a strange pull toward Clara and the children. It was as if, in helping them, he had found a part of himself he thought had been lost forever. Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and vulnerability. "You've done more than I could have ever hoped for." "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Jack shook his head, his own pain still fresh, but somehow diminished in the presence of Clara and her babies. He realized that he hadn't felt this needed in months, perhaps even years. "No need for thanks, just take care of yourself, and I'll do what I can to help." As Jack stood there, watching Clara feed her babies, a sense of purpose began to take root inside him. His mind, which had been clouded with sorrow and anger, began to clear. Helping Clara and her children wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a chance for him to heal, a chance for him to move forward. Over the next few days, Jack found himself returning to the shack more often. He continued to bring food, but he also began to help Clara repair the shack, working alongside her to make the place habitable. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The broken roof was patched, the dirt floor swept clean, and a small fire was kept burning to ward off the chill of the evenings. Clara, despite her exhaustion, worked hard to make the place livable, and Jack found himself more and more drawn to her strength and resilience. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, Clara opened up to Jack about her past. She spoke of her life before the pregnancy, growing up in a poor family with a father who was never kind. She told him about the man who had promised to marry her, only to disappear when he learned of her pregnancy. Clara's voice trembled as she described how she had been cast out by her father, left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart. "I thought he would come back for me," Clara said, her voice quiet. "But he never did. I was alone, and now I'm still alone, except for them." She glanced down at her children, who were now peacefully napping beside them. Jack listened intently, feeling the weight of her story. He couldn't imagine the pain of being rejected by her own family, of being abandoned by the man who should have been there for her. As she spoke, Jack began to realize just how much they had in common. Both of them had suffered loss. Both of them had been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them. But unlike Clara, Jack had been given a second chance. A chance to build something new, something that could heal the wounds of the past. He looked at her and saw not just the young woman who had been cast aside, but a mother who was willing to do anything to protect her children. And, in a way, he realized that she was teaching him how to love again, how to open his heart despite the pain that had once consumed it. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself becoming more involved in Clara's life. He wasn't just helping her with the shack anymore. He was becoming part of their family. He spent his evenings playing with the babies, making them laugh with silly faces and gestures. He watched Clara care for them with the kind of devotion that only a mother could have. And in those moments, as the laughter of the children filled the air, Jack felt something shift within him. The grief that had once overshadowed his every thought began to lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose, a new hope. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after a long day of work, Jack turned to Clara. "I never imagined that I would find myself here, helping someone like this," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I can't help but feel like this is where I'm supposed to be, with you and the kids. I don't want to leave." Clara met his gaze, her eyes full of uncertainty but also something else, a quiet hope. "I never thought I would end up here either," she said softly. "But I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this alone." For the first time in a long while, Jack felt at peace. He wasn't running from his grief anymore. He was facing it head on, and in doing so, he was finding a new life. A life with Clara and her children, a life that had the potential to heal them all. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, he was no longer afraid to find out. As the days passed, Jack found himself unexpectedly transformed by the presence of Clara and her children. What had begun as a solitary retreat to escape the haunting pain of losing Emma had now become a slow and painful process of healing, made possible by the bond that was gradually forming between him and Clara. His sorrow, which had once been his constant companion, was beginning to fade, replaced by a new sense of purpose and a growing connection to the woman and children who had come to rely on him. What Jack once thought would be a quiet escape from his grief was turning into the beginning of something new, something he never could have anticipated. The shack, once a symbol of his desire to retreat from the world, was now a place filled with the sounds of life. Jack had spent the last few weeks working alongside Clara to repair the dilapidated structure. What had once been a forgotten, decaying ruin was slowly transforming into a home. Jack had brought wood, nails, and tools from town, and together they worked in the mornings and evenings, each helping the other. Clara, despite her exhaustion and the care she needed to provide for the babies, worked diligently alongside him, her resilience inspiring him in ways he never expected. Over time, their quiet conversations, often centered around simple tasks like fixing the roof or gathering firewood, had become more profound. Jack had learned about Clara's difficult past, the abandonment by her family, the promises made and broken by a man who had never returned for her, and the hardship of being forced to raise 2 children alone. It was a story of rejection, of pain, but also one of immense strength. Clara, despite all the odds, had not given up. She had kept moving forward, fighting for her children and her own survival. Jack was beginning to see her, not just as a woman in need of help, but as someone whose courage mirrored his own. Someone who, like him, had faced life's harshest trials and yet had found a way to keep going. In return, Jack shared his own story with Clara. He spoke of his love for Emma, how they had built a life together, only for that life to be cruelly ripped away by her untimely death. He told her of his pain, his loneliness, and his need to escape to the shack in the wilderness, away from the memories of the life he had lost. But as he spoke, Jack realized something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. The pain he felt was not the only thing that defined him. He had a capacity for love that was still very much alive, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could begin to love again. One evening, after a long day of work, as the last light of the sun faded over the horizon, Jack sat next to Clara outside the shack. The children were asleep, tucked into the makeshift crib Clara had made from old blankets. Jack, feeling the weight of the days behind him, turned to Clara and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be here doing this. But being with you and the kids, it feels right. I don't want to leave." Clara looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "I never thought I'd end up here either. But I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this alone." Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that he wasn't walking that uncertain road alone. He had found something, someone, to live for again. And as he sat there with Clara, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky, he realized that the pain that had once consumed him wasn't something that could be fixed with solitude or avoidance. It was something that needed connection. Something that needed time, understanding, and most of all, love. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's feelings for Clara deepened. He wasn't just helping her anymore. He was becoming a part of their lives. He spent his evenings playing with the children, teaching them how to laugh, how to smile again. He had never thought he would find joy in such simple moments. But now, every time he heard Miguel and Maria's giggles, he couldn't help but feel his heart swell with affection. In them, he saw a new hope, one that wasn't defined by the tragedy of the past, but by the possibility of a future that was yet to be written. One morning, after a long day of work, Clara surprised him. She had prepared breakfast for them both, a simple but hearty meal of eggs and bread. As they ate together, she turned to him, her eyes shining with a mix of emotion and uncertainty. "Jack, I've been thinking," she began, "about everything that's happened. You've been so kind to us. But I don't want to be a burden. I know you didn't come here to take care of us. I think I should leave." Jack's heart sank. "No," he said firmly. "You're not a burden. I don't want you to leave. I found something here, Clara. I found a new purpose. You and the kids have helped me in ways I can't explain. I'm choosing to stay." Clara's face softened, and tears welled up in her eyes. "But I'm just a young woman with 2 children, and you've lost so much already. You don't owe us anything." Jack reached out, taking her hand in his. "I owe you everything, and I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever." It was in that moment that Jack realized something profound. He had been given a second chance. Not just to find peace, but to rebuild a life, to create something new. In Clara and her children, he had found a new family, and in return, he was offering them the stability, love, and security they so desperately needed. It wasn't about forgetting Emma or the life he had lost. It was about embracing the future, even if it was uncertain, and allowing himself to love again. In the weeks that followed, the shack continued to improve. Jack and Clara worked together, transforming it into a proper home. The once barren space now had a warmth to it, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Clara, with Jack's help, had grown into her role as a mother and partner, proving to herself and to him that she was more than capable. And Jack, who had come to this place to escape his grief, found himself rediscovering the joy of living. The day Jack proposed to Clara was simple yet profound. As they sat in front of the fire, the two of them together with their children, Jack knew that he had finally found a place to heal, not in isolation, but in love, in family, and in the shared experience of building something new. The pain of the past would always be there, but it no longer had the power to define him. Together, they had created something stronger than grief, a future filled with hope. Jack and Clara's life was just beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Clara continued to build not just a home, but a life together, a life that neither of them had ever imagined. Jack had come to the shack hoping to escape his grief, but in Clara and her children, he had found not just solace, but a new beginning. The shack, once a symbol of isolation and loss, was now filled with the warmth of their shared effort. Jack's pain, which had once consumed him, was being replaced by something more profound, a sense of purpose and connection he had never thought possible. The transformation was not just physical. The shack, which had been broken and abandoned, was becoming a home. Together, they had repaired the roof, fixed the walls, and cleared the land around them. Jack had always been a man of action, and the work provided a sense of control over his life that had been absent for so long. But the real change was in how he was beginning to see Clara. Clara, too, had changed in ways Jack hadn't expected. When they first met, she had been desperate, frightened, and alone, with nothing but her two crying children and a will to survive. But now, Clara was a mother and a partner, someone who had taken on the responsibility of making this life work, no matter how uncertain their future seemed. She had turned the shack into a home, filling it with love and laughter. She had cooked meals, cared for the children, and helped Jack with the repairs. She had become not just a survivor, but a woman who had found her strength again, who had rediscovered her own worth. Jack watched as she tended to Miguel and Maria, their laughter echoing through the small house. He could see how much Clara loved her children, and how hard she fought to give them the life they deserved. It reminded him of Emma, of how much she had loved him, of the way they had built their life together. But this time, there was something different. Jack had never expected to find love again, but Clara had shown him that it was possible. She had brought him back to life in a way that he hadn't thought was possible. His heart, once broken and cold, had begun to thaw. For the first time in a long time, Jack was not just surviving, he was living again. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "Jack, I don't know if I can ever repay you for all you've done for us," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude and sadness. Jack smiled, his heart full. "You don't have to repay me, Clara. You've given me something I didn't know I needed. You've given me a reason to keep going, to find hope again. I never thought I'd find this, not after losing Emma. But now, here we are." Clara's eyes softened as she looked at him. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of their shared experiences had brought them closer together, a bond that neither of them could have predicted when they first met. They had come from different worlds, yet now they were building a life together, one based on trust, understanding, and love. But as the days passed, Jack felt a sense of urgency building within him. He knew that he couldn't keep living in limbo, stuck between the past and the present. He had come to the shack to escape, but now it was clear to him that what he truly needed was to face the future. And that future, for him, was with Clara and the children. One evening, after they had finished their work for the day, Jack turned to Clara. "Clara, I want to be with you. I want to build a future together, not just for me, but for all of us. You, Miguel, Maria. We're a family now, and I want to make that official." Clara looked at him, her expression one of surprise and hope. "Jack, Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden to you. I know I've brought a lot of complications into your life. Jack shook his head. No, Clara. You're not a burden. You've brought something into my life that I didn't even know I was missing. I don't want to be alone anymore, not when I found something so real, so worth fighting for. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy. I want that too, she whispered. And so, in the quiet of their home, Jack made a decision. They would build a future together, no matter what anyone else thought. It wasn't about escaping the judgment of the village or fighting against the past. It was about choosing each other, about creating something new out of the ashes of their former lives. It was about love, in all its messy, imperfect glory. The days that followed were full of new beginnings. Jack continued to work on the shack, turning it into a true home. Clara helped him, of course, but she also took on the role of nurturing their family in ways Jack had never imagined. The children, Miguel and Maria, grew stronger every day, their laughter filling the space with a joy Jack had never thought possible. It wasn't always easy. There were still whispers from the village, still judgment and doubt. But Jack and Clara knew what they had was real. They didn't need anyone's approval. They had found something together that was worth fighting for. Something that could not be broken by the past or the opinions of others. And as the days turned to months, Jack and Clara's life became a testament to the power of love and resilience. They had both been broken in different ways, but together, they had healed. They had rebuilt their lives from the ground up, turning a forgotten shack into a home and their pain into hope. Jack realized that it wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about embracing the future. With Clara by his side, he knew that anything was possible. Together, they had created something beautiful, something that was more than just survival. It was a new beginning. And for the first time in years, Jack felt truly alive. As the weeks turned into months, Jack and Clara began to understand that their journey together was more than a mere survival. It was a new beginning, a second chance at life, love, and family. What had started as a refuge from pain and loss had blossomed into something neither of them could have predicted. Clara, who had once been an outcast with nothing to her name but 2 crying children, had become Jack's partner, his strength, and his hope. And Jack, once a broken man, had found a renewed purpose in their shared struggles and triumphs. Together, they were slowly transforming not just the shack, but their entire world. The shack, once a symbol of grief and abandonment, had been transformed by their efforts. With each passing day, Jack worked tirelessly on the repairs, fixing the roof, reinforcing the walls, and clearing the land. He found solace in the hard work, a welcome distraction from the pain he had carried since losing Emma. But the real change wasn't in the walls they built or the roof they repaired. It was in the life they were building together. Clara, too, was changing. When she had first arrived at the shack, she had been scared, vulnerable, and unsure of what the future held. But now, she was growing into a woman who could carry her own weight, who could contribute to their little family, and who could provide a safe, loving home for her children. She took charge of the household, making meals from whatever they had, and teaching Miguel and Maria to be kind, hard-working children. Clara had found her voice and her strength, and in doing so, she had breathed life into the shack, and into Jack's heart. Olam Jens, Jai, one chilly evening, as Jack sat beside the fire, watching the flames dance in the hearth, he realized just how much his life had changed since Clara and the children had come into it. What had started as a place to escape the pain of losing his wife was now a home full of love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter future. Jack had come to the shack to hide from the world, but what he had found was something far more precious: a family. Clara had become not just a partner, but a true companion. She had helped him heal in ways he hadn't even known he needed. She had taught him that life could still be meaningful, even after loss. She had shown him that love wasn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced, even after heartbreak. Clara, with her quiet strength and her undying devotion to her children, had breathed new life into Jack's weary soul. And in return, Jack had given Clara the security she had always longed for. He had given her a home, a future, and, perhaps most importantly, a sense of belonging. As they sat together by the fire, Jack knew that he wasn't just living anymore. He was truly alive again, and he had Clara and the children to thank for that. But their journey wasn't without its challenges. The whispers from the village still reached them, and there were times when the weight of judgment threatened to pull them down. The townspeople had their opinions about Jack's choices, about Clara and her children, about what was right and what was wrong. But Jack and Clara had come to realize that the only opinions that truly mattered were their own. They were no longer living for the approval of others. They had found something real, something true, in each other, and that was all they needed. As winter settled in, Clara found herself growing closer to Jack in ways she hadn't expected. The intimacy between them was slow, but it was steady. It wasn't a fiery, passionate romance. It was something deeper, more enduring. They were learning to trust each other, to rely on each other, and to find comfort in each other's presence. For Clara, it was a welcome change from the harshness of her past. For Jack, it was a reminder that life could still offer joy, even after the most devastating of losses. One night, as they sat together in the dim light of the fire, Clara spoke softly, her voice full of emotion. "Jack, do you ever think about what could have been? What life might have been like if things had been different?" Jack took a deep breath, the weight of the question settling in. He had thought about it, of course. He had thought about Emma, about the life they had planned together, about the future that had been stolen from him. But now, as he looked at Clara, at her strength, her resilience, and the love that had blossomed between them, he realized that the life he had with her was just as valuable, just as meaningful. "I think about the past a lot," Jack admitted. "But I also know that the life we have now is something I wouldn't change. We've built something real, something that's ours, and I think that's enough." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude and love. "You're right, Jack. We've built something beautiful, and I'm grateful for it every day." Jack reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. And the life he was building with Clara and the children was a life he could be proud of. As the seasons changed and the shack continued to transform into a true home, Jack and Clara found themselves facing the future together, hand in hand. The road ahead would not always be easy, but they had each other, and that was all they needed. Together, they had created something far more meaningful than either of them could have imagined when they first met. They had found love, healing, and a family in the most unlikely of places. And as they looked to the future, Jack knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had come through the darkness, and now they were ready to embrace the light. As the weeks stretched into months, the shack, once a place of isolation and despair, slowly transformed into a home, a sanctuary where Jack and Clara could rebuild their lives, side by side. What had started as a place for Jack to escape his grief had evolved into a symbol of hope, resilience, and the healing power of love. Clara, who had arrived at the shack broken and unsure, had now become the backbone of their new life, nurturing not only her children, but also Jack's weary heart. Together, they were forging a future that neither of them had ever expected. Jack had once come to the shack to escape his past, to hide from the memories of Emma. But now, every corner of the home spoke of the life they had created together. The repairs had been hard work, but with Clara's help, they had rebuilt not just the structure, but the foundation of their new life. The garden Clara had planted was thriving. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, all the small things that made their meals feel full of life. The firewood was neatly stacked, and the children's laughter, once a rarity in the empty space, now filled the rooms. The place was no longer just a shack. It was a home, and they had built it with their own hands. Clara's transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. The woman who had once been a stranger, scared and alone, had become a mother in every sense of the word. Her fierce love for her children had given her the strength to survive. But it was the love and kindness she had found in Jack that allowed her to truly thrive. Clara had taken charge of their small household, and with each passing day, she grew more confident. She had become the heart of their home, caring for the children and cooking meals with whatever they could find, always making sure they felt loved and safe. But it was her spirit that had truly transformed the shack, her warmth, her determination, and her willingness to give everything she had for the ones she loved. For Jack, the change was just as profound. When he had first met Clara, he had been a man broken by the loss of his wife, unable to see a way forward. He had come to the shack to escape the suffocating weight of grief. But what he had found instead was something he had never expected, a reason to live again. Clara's quiet strength, her unwavering dedication to her children, and the gentle way she had welcomed him into her life had gradually chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. Jack, who had once thought he was beyond healing, now found himself waking up each day with a renewed sense of purpose. But it wasn't just Jack who had changed. Their relationship, too, had evolved. What had begun as an arrangement born out of necessity had blossomed into a genuine partnership. They had learned to trust each other, to rely on each other, and to find comfort in each other's presence. The intimacy between them had grown slowly but steadily. First in their shared work, then in their quiet conversations, and finally, in the way they had begun to depend on one another for emotional support. Jack had learned to open up again, and Clara had found someone who cared for her and her children, not out of pity, but because he had come to love them as his own. One night, as Jack sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker in the hearth, he realized how much they had both changed.